The twilight in Arizona painted the distant Superstition Mountains in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, a landscape that had seen countless dawns and just as many secrets buried under its unforgiving dust. Inside, Dr. Aris Thorne's study, a sanctuary of forgotten knowledge, wrestled with the encroaching shadows. The only light came from a single, amber-glow desk lamp, casting long, dancing silhouettes of stacks of weathered tomes and meticulously organized files across the room. Dust motes, ancient as the theories Aris chased, waltzed in the meager beam, giving the air a tangible, shimmering quality. The silence outside was profound, broken only by the occasional, almost mournful sigh of the desert wind whispering through the cracked window panes, a sound that carried with it the ghost of untold millennia. It was a silence that felt less like an absence and more like a presence, a holding of breath, as if the very air itself was waiting for something immense to stir. Aris sat hunched over his mahogany desk, a relic in itself, scarred with the testament of endless nights of research. His fingers, long and stained with ink and the faint grime of old paper, traced the intricate lines of an ancient Sumerian star chart, its delicate parchment brittle beneath his touch. The room smelled of aged paper, dry dust, and a faint, metallic tang from the old humidifier that struggled against the desert's relentless dryness. Each object in his study, from the chipped obsidian dagger resting on a velvet cushion to the framed photograph of a younger, hopeful Aris beside his stern, renowned mentor, Dr. Alistair Finch, seemed to hum with a latent energy, a forgotten echo of purpose. The air was thick not just with dust, but with an unspoken promise that nothing, truly nothing, would ever be the same after tonight. He felt it in the subtle tremor of his hands, in the inexplicable chill that prickled the hairs on his arms, despite the stifling desert heat. It was a premonition, a cold dread seeping into his bones, telling him that the comfortable boundaries of his reality were about to shatter. For weeks, a peculiar, disquieting memory had haunted Aris, surfacing at the edges of his consciousness, particularly during those hours when the desert bled from night to dawn. It wasn't a memory of an event, but of a symbol, a recurring image in his dreams, sharp and vivid, a three-pronged fork descending from a winged disc. It was a motif he'd seen variations of in countless ancient cultures, dismissed by mainstream archaeology as mere mythological repetition or convergent evolution of symbolism. But in his dreams, it felt different. It felt insistent. It felt personal. He would wake with a gasp, the image burned into his retinas, a phantom ache in his chest, as if a piece of him was trying to remember something profoundly important. Something it had been forced to forget. This wasn't merely academic intrigue. It was a deeply unsettling, emotional explosion, a primal whisper from a past that wasn't his own, yet felt intimately connected to his very being. The symbol had begun appearing outside his dreams too, in the haphazard swirl of coffee grounds at the bottom of his mug, in the intricate patterns of cracked desert earth, even in the way shadows fell across his cluttered bookshelves. It was a silent, persistent thrum beneath the surface of his ordered life, a discordant note in the symphony of his meticulously catalogued world, hinting at an imminent disruption. The silence of the study deepened, as if even the wind had paused to listen. Aris pushed his spectacles higher on his nose, the polished lenses reflecting the lamp's glow like two tiny, intense suns. His gaze fell upon a stack of recently declassified government documents marked Top Secret Project Celestial Anchor, acquired through years of persistent, often ridiculed FOIA requests. They were thick, bound in faded green covers, brittle at the edges, hinting at decades of obscurity within some forgotten archive vault in D.C. He'd spent countless hours poring over them, searching for the elusive thread, the single anomaly that would justify his obsession, his academic exile. Most pages were redacted, black bars obliterating names, dates, and locations, turning official reports into abstract art. Yet Aris had developed an almost preternatural ability to read between the lines, to infer meaning from the negative space, to spot the pattern in the deliberate omission. He believed, with the fervor of a true scholar, that the greatest truths often resided not in what was overtly presented, but in what was zealously hidden. And tonight he felt closer than ever to unearthing a truth that would either vindicate his life's work or plunge him further into the abyss of academic purgatory. The desert night outside grew colder, the vast expanse of the cosmos above him glittering with indifferent brilliance. Each star was a pinprick in the fabric of eternity, a silent witness to countless cycles of creation and destruction, of arrival and departure. Aris felt small, insignificant, yet undeniably connected to that immense canvas. The sheer weight of cosmic time pressed down on him, a burden carried by every ancient artifact he studied, every forgotten text he deciphered. He adjusted his position, the old leather of his chair groaning softly in protest. His eyes, tired but sharp, scanned a particularly dense report, its typewritten words faded to sepia. It was a geological survey from the 1970s, focused on anomalous seismic activity near a remote, unpopulated stretch of federal land in Nevada. A familiar place, a place he knew well. He'd visited it countless times, always feeling drawn to its desolate beauty, its strange energy. He knew the mainstream explanation for the seismic activity: underground nuclear testing, a fact that had always struck him as a convenient, almost too perfect cover story for something far more profound. He flipped through several pages, his mind sifting through the technical jargon, the seemingly mundane seismic data points and geological strata descriptions. He was looking for the outlier, the one data point that didn't fit, the small crack in the dam of official narratives. And then he saw it. Not a grand revelation, not a screaming headline, but a subtle discrepancy. A series of faint, almost imperceptible lines on a topographical map, buried within an appendix, marked as geological anomaly, likely natural erosion patterns. But to Aris, who had studied ancient engineering and celestial alignments for decades, these lines were anything but natural. They formed a precise geometric pattern, too perfect, too deliberate to be accidental. And at the nexus of this pattern, a tiny, almost invisible symbol was faintly etched, so small it could be mistaken for a printing error or a smudged ink mark. It was the three-pronged fork descending from a winged disc, the same symbol from his dreams, the same symbol that had been haunting his waking hours. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few dare to show. Aris felt a jolt, a sudden electric current coursing through him. His breath hitched, held captive in his lungs. This wasn't merely an academic breakthrough, it was a personal validation, a chilling confirmation that his intuition, his persistent nightmares, his years of being dismissed as an eccentric were all leading him to this very point. The symbol, so small, so easily overlooked, was a key, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. It shifted his perception from merely investigating a theory to confronting a tangible, undeniable piece of evidence. The geological anomaly was no anomaly at all, but a deliberate design, hidden in plain sight, masquerading as a natural formation in the vast, indifferent landscape of the Nevada desert. This was the first turn, the subtle shift in perspective that transformed a puzzle into a premonition. The weight of the declassified files suddenly felt heavier, charged with a new, terrifying significance. He traced the symbol with a trembling finger, his mind racing through possibilities. Was it a coincidence? A trick of light? A figment of his sleep-deprived imagination? He immediately dismissed these thoughts. His mind was too disciplined for such self-deception. The pattern was precise, the symbol undeniable, even in its faintness. It was a whisper from antiquity, an echo reverberating through the static of modern bureaucracy, finally reaching ears ready to hear. He pulled out a large, rolled-up map of the southwestern United States, carefully unfurling it across the spare table beside his desk. It was an old USGS map, richly detailed, showing every contour, every dry riverbed, every lonely peak. He pinpointed the coordinates from the Declassified report, marking the location with a sharp, red pencil. It was deep within the Nellis Air Force Range, a place known for its secrecy and restricted access. A vast expanse of desert where the U.S. military conducted advanced training and, some whispered, experimented with exotic extraterrestrial technologies. The irony was not lost on Aris. Ancient secrets hidden beneath layers of modern classified operations. Dr. Aris Thorne wasn't just an academic. He was a man consumed by an almost pathological drive for truth, a drive forged in the crucible of intellectual ostracism. His official biography painted a picture of a brilliant but controversial historian specializing in ancient civilizations, particularly those with advanced technological or astronomical knowledge. He'd published several papers challenging conventional timelines and proposing extraterrestrial influences in early human development, theories that had promptly earned him a one-way ticket to the fringes of academia. He was what some politely called a rogue scholar, and others, less charitably, a crackpot. He lived a solitary life, punctuated only by the relentless pursuit of knowledge that mainstream institutions had deemed inconvenient or impossible. His days were a monotonous rhythm of research, cross-referencing ancient texts with geological surveys, astronomical charts with mythological narratives, all from the quiet isolation of his desert home. He sought not fame or fortune, but vindication. He carried the heavy burden of his mentor's legacy, Dr. Finch, who had vanished mysteriously years ago after hinting at a world-changing discovery. Aris suspected his mentor hadn't simply disappeared. He believed Finch had gotten too close to the truth and had been removed. This unshakable belief fueled Aris's every waking moment, driving him to delve deeper into the shadows, to peel back the layers of deception. His greatest fear wasn't death, but living a lie, accepting the sanitized, officially sanctioned version of history. He feared that he too would succumb to the convenient narrative, that his own truth would remain buried, unseen, unheard. He carried with him an almost tangible sense of unfinished business, a torch passed from a hand that had been silenced too soon. It was a weight, a responsibility that never allowed him to truly rest, to truly let go. His routine was a sacred ritual. Every morning, before the relentless sun could truly bake the desert, he'd make a pot of strong black coffee, the aroma momentarily masking the smell of aged paper. He'd sit on his small porch, watching the light slowly creep over the mountains, painting them in new, stark definitions, each peak a silent observer to his quest. He'd review his notes, meticulously organized by culture, by era, by astronomical alignment. He'd eat simple meals, canned soup, a sandwich, often forgetting to eat at all, lost in the labyrinthine corridors of ancient thought. His only companions were the books, the files, and the occasional, almost human cry of a distant coyote. He tried to forget the dismissive looks from former colleagues, the thinly veiled condescension in their voices when he spoke of celestial architects or pre-diluvian technology. He tried to forget the emptiness of his own personal life, sacrificed at the altar of his obsession, but these things gnawed at him, especially in the quiet hours of the night, when the desert wind seemed to whisper their names. A subtle, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the room, rattling the small, framed photo of his mentor on the desk. Aris froze, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room, searching for the source. Nothing. The wind outside had died down, leaving an even deeper, more profound silence. He attributed it to the old house settling, or perhaps the distant rumbling of military aircraft, though he heard no engines. He tried to dismiss it, to return to his maps, but a nagging sense of unease settled upon him like a shroud. He picked up the photo of Dr. Finch, his thumb gently caressing the faded image. Finch's eyes, even in the black-and-white photograph, held a knowing glint, a spark of understanding that Aris recognized within himself. It was a look that said, "I know something you don't, but you will soon." As he held the photo, his eyes caught on a small, almost invisible detail in the background of the image, a framed certificate on Finch's own bookshelf, barely visible. It was a certificate of recognition from a clandestine historical society, one Aris had only heard whispered about in hushed tones among fringe scholars. He'd always dismissed it as mere academic esoterica, a club for those who shared unconventional interests. But now, seeing it there in Finch's private sanctuary, a chilling realization washed over him. The certificate bore a faint, almost subliminal emblem, the three-pronged fork, subtly integrated into its design, almost as if it were part of a stylized crest. This wasn't just a society, it was a network that his mentor was deeply involved in, and one that had perhaps been watching Aris all along. This was the second emotional explosion, a sudden, gut-wrenching insight. Finch hadn't just researched the truth, he had been part of it, or at least intimately connected to those who guarded it. The tremor he felt moments ago now seemed less like a structural creak and more like an internal vibration, a recognition from the universe that he was finally seeing a piece of the larger puzzle, a truth his mentor had tried to prepare him for, perhaps even guided him towards. The implications were staggering, almost paralyzing. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees, raising goosebumps on Aris's arms. He felt a profound shift in the air, as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a hidden layer of reality that had always been there, just out of sight. The growing tension wasn't just in his mind, it permeated the very atmosphere of his study, turning the familiar comfort of his sanctuary into a chamber of unsettling revelations. The desert outside seemed to hold its breath, the vast, silent expanse mirroring the sudden expansion of Aris's own internal landscape. He looked at the map again, then back at the photo of Finch, a new urgency igniting within him. His mentor's disappearance wasn't a tragedy, it was a strategic move, or perhaps a forced silence, aimed at protecting a truth so monumental it transcended life and death. Aris knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that he was no longer just a researcher. He was an inheritor of a legacy, one fraught with danger and unimaginable secrets. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has deeply resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this. The night deepened into a velvety black, illuminated only by the stark, unwavering brilliance of the desert stars. Aris felt an overwhelming surge of energy, a feverish drive that banished all thoughts of sleep. He was no longer tracing lines on a map. He was connecting dots across millennia, across civilizations, across the vast cosmic canvas. He moved with a renewed purpose, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his old laptop, cross-referencing names, dates, and symbols. He began a new search, focusing on the clandestine historical society hinted at in Finch's photo. His initial searches yielded little, only obscure academic mentions, vague references to esoteric collections, and privately funded expeditions. It was a shadow organization, expertly hidden behind layers of scholarly decorum. But Aris now knew where to look, how to pry open the closed doors. He remembered a cryptic note Finch had once left him years ago after a particularly heated debate about the origins of metallurgy. It was a quote, attributed to a forgotten Sumerian scholar: "The deepest truths are not spoken, but inscribed in the stone where the sky touches the earth." At the time, Aris had dismissed it as poetic mysticism. Now, it resonated with profound meaning. He refocused his search, not on organizations, but on locations mentioned in relation to the society. Specific archaeological sites, ancient observatories, remote caves in the American Southwest. And then he found it. An obscure digitized journal entry from the 1930s, chronicling a geological survey funded by an anonymous benefactor for a remote area in the Utah desert, near the Four Corners region. The entry detailed unusual rock formations, described as unnatural columnar basalt structures, and hinted at anomalous magnetic fields. What struck Aris was the casual mention of an unusual inscription found within a narrow canyon, quickly dismissed as Native American petroglyphs of unknown origin. His heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of discovery. He zoomed in on the scanned images attached to the journal entry. The petroglyphs were indeed stylized, but one image immediately caught his eye. A depiction of several figures, clearly humanoid, but disproportionately tall and slender, with elongated heads and large almond-shaped eyes, standing beside a winged disc, identical to the one he'd seen in the Declassified report and his dreams. One of the figures held a staff, topped with the three-pronged fork symbol. This wasn't merely a coincidence, it was a direct, undeniable link. A specific geological formation, anomalous magnetic fields, and a depiction of what could only be interpreted as extraterrestrial beings, explicitly connected to the symbol of the sky dwellers. The partial truth was emerging, raw and astonishing. He immediately cross-referenced the coordinates of this Utah site with his previous findings from the Nevada site. They weren't geographically adjacent, but a quick calculation of celestial alignments revealed a startling pattern. Both sites, when viewed in relation to a specific constellation, Orion, revered by countless ancient cultures, formed a precise, interlocking triangle. It was an astronomical key, a celestial lock-and-key mechanism that linked the seemingly disparate locations. This wasn't random. It was intelligently designed, a monumental hidden architecture spread across the vast American landscape. The profound significance of this discovery was like a sudden, blinding flash of light in his mind, searing away years of doubt and speculation. He had found a truth, a partial truth that connected his world, the world of dusty archives and forgotten maps, to the world of ancient gods and cosmic visitors. This was the Virada II. The major, undeniable discovery that shattered his existing paradigms. His understanding of history, of humanity's place in the universe, was suddenly, irrevocably altered. The narratives he had been taught, the very foundations of his academic training, crumbled into dust around him. He wasn't just dealing with forgotten cultures, he was uncovering evidence of a profound, intergalactic intervention that had shaped human civilization from its very inception. The ancient gods, the Anunnaki, weren't just myths, not just allegories. They were real, and their influence was not a matter of belief, but of meticulously documented, albeit hidden, fact. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on him, a physical manifestation of the immense weight of the truth he now held in his hands. The air grew heavy, charged with an almost palpable energy, as if the desert itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to piece together the rest of the story. He knew with an unwavering certainty that he was on the precipice of something far grander, far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The puzzle was revealing itself, piece by agonizing piece, and each new connection tightened the knot of destiny around him. The remaining hours of the night dissolved into a blur of frantic activity. Aris felt an almost manic energy, his mind racing, connecting symbols, prophecies, and declassified reports with a speed and clarity he hadn't experienced before. The quiet desert outside, usually a source of calm, now felt like a silent, watchful entity, its vastness mirroring the immensity of the secrets he was unearthing. He immersed himself in the digital archives, pulling up satellite imagery of the Utah site, cross-referencing it with obscure archaeological surveys. The columnar basalt structures were indeed visible, appearing almost too regular, too perfectly aligned, to be purely natural formations. He spotted faint traces of what looked like old, rudimentary excavation sites, quickly abandoned and overgrown, suggesting that someone else had been there, perhaps long ago, and had been either thwarted or silenced. The sense of urgency intensified, a frantic drumbeat in his ears. He focused on the descriptions of the magnetic anomalies. According to the 1930s report, the magnetic fields were localized, sporadic, and defied conventional geological explanation. They peaked at specific times, aligning with certain celestial events, particularly when the constellation Orion was prominent in the night sky. This wasn't random, it was a deliberate signal, a beacon, a clock. He imagined the ancient beings depicted in the petroglyphs, their elongated forms moving with a grace unknown to humanity, their eyes reflecting the vast, cold emptiness of space. He could almost hear the low hum of their advanced technology, feel the vibration of their presence in the very stones of the desert. The images were so vivid in his mind, they felt less like imagination and more like distant memories, half-recalled echoes from a time before time. What if the history we've been taught, the one neatly packaged and presented in textbooks, is nothing more than a carefully constructed narrative, a comfortable illusion designed to keep us from asking the truly uncomfortable questions? What if everything we believe about our origins, our purpose, our place in the cosmos is fundamentally, profoundly wrong? The questions surfaced in his mind, not as academic queries, but as deep existential doubts, challenging the very bedrock of his worldview. He paused, rubbing his temples, the weight of the implications pressing down on him. The air in the study felt thin, charged with an inexplicable energy, as if the ancient truths he was unearthing were beginning to manifest, to subtly alter the fabric of his immediate reality. He could almost smell ozone, a faint electrical scent, mingling with the dust and old paper. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clang echoed from downstairs, cutting through the profound silence of the night. Aris froze, every nerve instantly alert. He wasn't expecting anyone. He lived in splendid isolation, miles from the nearest neighbor. His blood ran cold. He grabbed the heavy obsidian dagger from his desk, its ancient edge cool against his palm, a primitive weapon against an unknown threat. He moved silently, his bare feet padding softly on the worn wooden floor, each creak of the old house amplifying the terrifying sound of his own racing heartbeat. He descended the narrow, winding staircase, the darkness of the hallway ahead seeming to deepen, to swallow the faint light from his study. The air grew colder, the scent of ozone now more pronounced, accompanied by a faint, earthy smell, like wet soil, and something metallic, almost burnt. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he saw it. The front door, usually bolted, was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness revealing the vast, indifferent desert outside. And on the worn rug just inside the door, glinting dully in the dim light, was a small, ornate locket, clearly out of place. It was old, intricately carved, made of a dark, unfamiliar metal. Aris recognized the symbol etched onto its surface, the three-pronged fork, but it wasn't the locket itself that sent a shiver of pure terror down his spine. It was the fact that he recognized the locket from a faded photograph he'd found tucked away in his mentor's personal effects. A photo of a young woman, her face obscured, wearing that exact locket. Finch had never mentioned a family, a partner. He had always been a solitary figure, just like Aris. This locket appearing here now was a blatant, undeniable lie revealed, a profound deception from his mentor. Finch hadn't just been a researcher. He'd had a secret life, a secret connection to this ancient extraterrestrial mystery, perhaps even a secret family deeply entwined with it. The third emotional explosion wasn't just a discovery, it was a betrayal, a shattering of trust. Why had Finch kept this hidden? What else had he been concealing? The implications were devastating. His mentor, the man he had idolized, the one whose disappearance he mourned, had been playing a much deeper, much more dangerous game than Aris had ever imagined. The locket wasn't just a clue. It was a declaration that Aris was now irrevocably entangled in a web spun by forces beyond human comprehension, a web that had ensnared his mentor long ago. The air around him crackled, and for a fleeting moment he thought he heard a faint whisper, an ancient alien murmur that seemed to coil around his heart. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has deeply resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this. The sense of dread intensified, a cold knot tightening in Aris's stomach. The locket felt heavy in his hand, not just with its unknown metal, but with the weight of Finch's secrets. He stared at the open door, the vast, inky blackness of the desert seeming to stare back, mocking him with its silent indifference. Had someone been here? Had they just left the locket as a message, a warning? Or had they been here watching him, observing his frantic research, allowing him to discover just enough to be drawn deeper into their game? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him. He wasn't alone in this pursuit. He was a pawn, or perhaps a pre-selected agent, in a scheme far grander and more ancient than he could comprehend. He pulled the door shut, locking it with a trembling hand, the clatter of the old bolts echoing too loudly in the sudden silence. He returned to his study, the locket clutched tight in his hand. He meticulously examined it under a magnifying glass. The symbol was intricately etched, almost glowing with a faint inner light under the magnification. The metal was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, smooth, cool to the touch, yet radiating a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, a subtle vibration that thrummed against his skin. He tried to open it, searching for a seam, a clasp, but it seemed to be a seamless piece, a solid enigma. He realized then that it wasn't meant to be opened by conventional means. It was an artifact, a piece of alien technology, perhaps activated by a specific frequency, a particular touch, or even a specific thought. He placed it carefully on his desk, beside the maps and ancient texts, another piece of the ever-expanding puzzle. This was the Virada III, the monumental realization that he was no longer just an observer, a detached scholar. He was a participant, intimately entangled in something far grander and more terrifying than he had ever imagined. The forces he had been researching, the sky dwellers, the Anunnaki, weren't just historical curiosities or mythological figures. They were active, present, and observing him. Their presence wasn't just in the ancient texts. It was in the subtle shifts of his reality, in the unexpected appearance of the locket, in the whispers of the wind, in the persistent haunting of his dreams. He was being watched, guided, perhaps even manipulated, towards an inevitable confrontation with a truth that transcended human understanding. The story had become infinitely darker, deeper, more personal, more dangerous. The revelation that he was not alone in his quest, that he was being actively observed, brought with it a profound sense of isolation and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of the wind carried a silent message. He found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, checking the locks, jumping at sudden noises. Sleep became an elusive luxury, his mind a whirlwind of theories and possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. He tried to contact old colleagues, those few who hadn't completely dismissed him, but his calls went unanswered, his emails bounced back. It was as if a silent wall had been erected around him, cutting him off from the world he once knew. The feeling of being targeted, of being a chosen player in an unseen game, was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. He revisited the declassified files, now seeing every redaction, every ambiguous phrase through a new lens. What if these weren't just attempts to hide information from the public, but carefully crafted breadcrumbs left for someone specific to follow? What if Finch himself had planted some of these files, knowing Aris would eventually find them, knowing Aris would be driven by the same insatiable curiosity? The thought was both comforting and horrifying. It meant he was not entirely alone, but it also meant his every move was anticipated, perhaps even orchestrated. The burden of this knowledge weighed heavily on him, pressing down on his chest, making it difficult to breathe. He felt like a puppet on strings, pulled by unseen hands, dancing to an ancient cosmic tune. His mind replayed every strange event, every odd coincidence, every unsettling dream. The recurring symbol, the tremor in his study, the photo of Finch, the locket, they were all pieces of a meticulously crafted puzzle designed to lead him down this path. He began to question his own free will, his own agency. Was he truly seeking the truth, or was he merely fulfilling a preordained role in an ancient prophecy? The questions were overwhelming, suffocating. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking so violently that the water sloshed over the rim, spilling onto the polished wood of his desk. He stared at the small puddle, the water reflecting the amber glow of his lamp, distorting the world into shimmering, unrecognizable shapes. As he watched the water, the reflections seemed to swirl, coalescing into patterns, forming an image that was both familiar and utterly alien. The three-pronged fork, then the winged disc, then the elongated figures he'd seen in the petroglyphs, all danced within the small, shimmering puddle. It was a fleeting, hallucinatory vision, a trick of the light and his sleep-deprived mind, yet it felt intensely real, profoundly significant. And then he heard it again, not with his ears, but deep within his mind, a whisper that vibrated through his very bones, bypassing his auditory nerves, settling directly into his consciousness. It was a voice, ancient and resonant, speaking a language he didn't understand, yet its meaning was terrifyingly clear. Thorn, the cycles turn, the sleeper stirs. The voice echoed, not fading, but growing in intensity, a chorus of ethereal whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of his study, from the ancient texts themselves. The air crackled with energy, a faint hum now clearly audible, growing louder, vibrating through the floorboards, through his chair, directly into his body. The locket on his desk began to glow, a soft, pulsating blue light emanating from its intricate surface, illuminating the symbol etched upon it. It was no longer just an object. It was alive, responsive, an activated beacon. This was the fourth emotional explosion, a visceral, terrifying communion with the impossible. A symbol appearing in the wrong place, an ancient voice whispering his name, an object awakening, a vision tearing the line between the real and the impossible. The boundaries of his sanity felt stretched to their absolute limit. He was no longer just studying the Anunnaki, he was experiencing them. The hum intensified, filling the room, vibrating the very air, making his teeth ache. The light from the locket pulsed faster, brighter, casting bizarre, shifting shadows across the walls, making the shelves of books seem to writhe and contort. He felt an irresistible pull, a powerful, almost magnetic force drawing him towards the locket, towards the pulsating blue light. His heart hammered, a frantic drum against his ribs, but despite the overwhelming terror, he felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if he had been walking towards this moment his entire life. He knew, with an unwavering certainty, that this was the point of no return. The curtain was about to be fully drawn back, and what lay beyond would change everything he had ever known, everything he had ever believed. His world was about to be torn open, revealing the true cosmic horror or wonder that had always lurked just beneath the surface. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has deeply resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this. Driven by an instinct he couldn't name, an ancient compulsion that bypassed all reason, Aris grabbed his car keys. The desert outside his window, usually a calming expanse, now pulsed with an unseen energy, its vastness mirroring the overwhelming scale of the revelation that awaited him. The full moon, a silent sentinel, cast long, spectral shadows across the desolate landscape, painting everything in an eerie silver glow. He didn't think. He simply acted, propelled by a force beyond his understanding, a primal urge to witness the ultimate truth. He knew where he had to go, the Nevada site, the place marked on the declassified map, the nexus of the geometric pattern, the point where the celestial anomaly met the desert Earth. His old pickup truck rumbled to life, its engine sputtering in protest before settling into a steady roar. The drive was a blur, the desolate highway stretching endlessly before him, illuminated only by the truck's headlights and the unblinking gaze of the desert stars. The air, crisp and cold, offered no comfort, only the metallic tang of impending discovery. The internal whisper of the ancient voice from the locket continued, a low thrumming behind his eyes, guiding him, pulling him forward. He bypassed the usual military checkpoints using an old, forgotten service road he'd discovered years ago during one of his less authorized excursions. The road was barely more than a jeep trail, winding through canyons and over mesas, the tires kicking up plumes of dust that hung like ghosts in the moonlight. As he neared the coordinates, the landscape began to change. The usual scrub brush gave way to peculiar, almost unnatural rock formations, columnar basalt structures that seemed to erupt from the earth like petrified giants, their shadows stretching long and ominous under the moon. The air grew still, heavy, charged with an almost tangible energy. He could feel it in his teeth, a faint vibration that resonated deep within his bones. The hum, which had started in his study, was now all around him, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath his wheels. The locket, still clutched in his hand, pulsed with an intense blue light, guiding him through the darkness, a cosmic compass leading him to his destiny. He parked the truck near a cluster of the strange basalt columns, the silence deafening once the engine died. The ground beneath Aris's feet vibrated with a faint, steady hum, a low thrumming that seemed to resonate deep within the earth itself. The air, already thick with anticipation, grew heavy with an electric tang, reminiscent of ozone after a lightning strike. He stepped out of the truck, the cold desert air biting at his exposed skin, but he barely registered the chill. His gaze was fixed on the landscape before him, which now seemed to writhe with an unseen energy. The columnar basalt structures, so perfectly formed and ominously silent, began to hum faintly, their smooth, dark surfaces reflecting the moonlight with a strange, almost liquid quality. He felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic force emanating from a specific point among the towering formations, a place where the columns seemed to converge, forming a natural yet eerily precise gateway. He walked towards it, his steps deliberate, almost trance-like, the obsidian dagger still clutched in his hand, though he knew instinctively it would be useless against whatever lay ahead. The locket in his other hand pulsed with increasing intensity, its blue light growing brighter, casting a mesmerizing glow on the desert floor. As he approached the convergence, he noticed the ground itself was different here. Not loose sand and gravel, but a smooth, dark, almost obsidian-like surface, perfectly flat, extending like a vast, ancient plaza beneath the basalt giants. And at the center of this plaza, barely visible in the lunar glow, was a colossal circular indentation in the rock, filled with what looked like fine, black dust. It was too perfect, too symmetrical to be natural. He reached the edge of the circular depression, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The hum was now a deep, resonant chord, vibrating through his entire body. The air crackled with static electricity, making the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. He could hear it now, a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat emanating from deep within the earth. And then, as if responding to his presence, the black dust in the circular indentation began to stir. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, it began to swirl, forming intricate patterns, spiraling inwards towards the center. The light from the locket intensified further, bathing the entire area in an ethereal blue glow, illuminating the rising dust. The swirling dust began to coalesce, to solidify, not into stone, but into something else, something fluid and ephemeral, yet undeniably structured. As it rose, it began to take shape, forming outlines, contours, until a vast, intricate diagram emerged from the ground, glowing with the same pulsating blue light as the locket. It was a schematic, a blueprint of immense complexity, depicting colossal structures, geometric patterns, and symbols that Aris now recognized from his Sumerian texts and the declassified files. At the center of this glowing schematic, a towering, unmistakable figure began to form, not a carving, but a three-dimensional projection of light and energy, shimmering with an ethereal luminescence. It was an Anunnaki. The figure stood impossibly tall, its form radiating power and ancient wisdom. Its elongated head, almond-shaped eyes, and slender limbs were exactly as depicted in the Utah petroglyphs. But here it was alive, vibrant, almost tangible. It was adorned with intricate metallic armor, and in its hand it held a staff topped with the familiar three-pronged fork. But the most striking feature was the pair of immense, feathered wings that spread behind its back, shimmering with an inner light, casting colossal, moving shadows across the basalt columns. This wasn't merely a depiction, it was a holographic memory, an energy projection from something far deeper, far older, buried beneath the desert floor. It pulsed with a silent, yet undeniable intelligence, its luminous eyes seeming to gaze directly into Aris's very soul. This was the Virada 4, the devastating truth Aris had unknowingly sought his entire life. He was seeing not a myth, not an interpretation, but a direct, unadulterated glimpse into the past, into the true physical presence of the Anunnaki. This was an artifact not just of their presence, but of their living presence. A portal, perhaps, a memory encoded in the very earth, waiting for the right key to awaken it. The sheer scale of it, the technological sophistication, the undeniable proof that these beings were real, were here, were watching. It was overwhelming. His mind struggled to process the magnitude of the revelation, his body trembling, not from fear alone, but from awe, from the raw, unbridled shock of encountering the impossible. This was the moment history ceased to be a subject of study and became a living, breathing, terrifying reality. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has deeply resonated with you. So, strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this. The Anunnaki projection pulsed, its luminous form shimmering, revealing intricate details of its metallic garments and the subtle movements of its vast feathered wings. The eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to hold galaxies within their depths, a silent testament to eons of cosmic travel and observation. Aris felt an almost unbearable pressure in his chest, as if his very consciousness was struggling to contain the immensity of the truth unfolding before him. He was seeing the architects of his world, the beings who had, according to ancient texts, descended from the heavens to shape early human civilization, to impart knowledge, to create. But their presence was not benevolent in the classical sense of gods. There was an undeniable sense of purpose, of cold, calculating intelligence that emanated from the spectral figure, a power that transcended human morality or understanding. The hum intensified further, resonating through the ground, vibrating up Aris's legs and through his entire skeletal structure. He felt disoriented, his perceptions blurring at the edges, the desert landscape around him seeming to ripple and waver like a mirage. The air grew heavy with an almost cloying scent of ozone and something else, something alien and mineral, like burnt cosmic dust. He could hear faint whispers now, not just in his mind, but in the very air, a symphony of ancient, resonant voices, speaking a language that was not of Earth, yet he understood snippets, fragments of meaning that pierced through the veil of his confusion. Nibiru, the harvest, the return. The words echoed, not as distinct sentences, but as conceptual download, implanting understanding directly into his consciousness. He stumbled forward, drawn by an irresistible force towards the glowing Anunnaki projection, towards the circular diagram etched in light on the ground. The locket in his hand now vibrated so fiercely it felt like a living thing, humming with sympathetic resonance to the colossal projection. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now mingled with an overwhelming sense of wonder, of profound destiny. He was no longer a lone scholar. He was a witness, a chosen recipient of an unveiling that had been millennia in the making. He reached out a trembling hand, not towards the holographic figure itself, but towards the smooth, dark, obsidian-like surface of the circular plaza, towards the source of the immense projection. His fingers, cold and raw from the desert air, brushed against the smooth, impossibly cold surface of the obsidian-like ground at the center of the glowing schematic. It was not stone, not metal, but something utterly alien, something that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of raw, unfathomable energy coursed through him, not painful, but overwhelming, electrifying every nerve ending, every cell in his body. His vision exploded into a blinding flash of white light, an instantaneous, impossible cascade of images, sounds, and sensations that overwhelmed his senses, compressing billions of years of cosmic history into a single agonizing instant. He saw worlds forming, stars being born and dying, nebulae swirling in cosmic ballets. He saw a titanic planet, not spherical but ovoid, scarred and beautiful, orbiting in a chaotic elliptical path far beyond the outer reaches of Earth's solar system, Nibiru. He witnessed its gravitational dance, its cyclical return towards the inner planets, a return that happened not in decades or centuries, but in millennia. He saw beings of immense intellect and advanced technology, the Anunnaki, harvesting precious metals, particularly gold, from Earth, not for greed, but for the very survival of their own dying world, for a complex atmospheric shield. He saw them manipulating primitive hominids, blending their own advanced genetics with early Earth life, accelerating evolution, creating humanity in their image, not out of benevolence, but out of necessity, to serve as a labor force. He saw flashes of ancient Sumer, of Egypt, of the Indus Valley, all dotted with their colossal structures, their impossible technologies, their silent oversight. He witnessed their departure, not as an abandonment, but as a strategic retreat, a waiting period until Nibiru's next approach, and he saw their hidden legacy encoded in human DNA, in the very myths and legends that humanity had come to dismiss as mere stories. The entire vast tapestry of cosmic history, intertwining with humanity's tiny thread, downloaded directly into his mind, bypassing language, bypassing conscious thought, settling into the deepest recesses of his being. This was the ultimate, final emotional explosion, a gesture against logic, an act of faith and pure instinct that unlocked a universe of forbidden knowledge. He staggered backward, reeling, his mind struggling to integrate the impossible truth. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has deeply resonated with you. So, strengthen this content. Like it now and share it with someone who needs to see this. The blinding flash of insight receded, leaving Aris gasping for breath, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. The Anunnaki projection, still shimmering before him, seemed to observe him with a new, subtle intensity, as if acknowledging his newly acquired knowledge. The hum around him remained, a constant low thrum that now felt less like a threat and more like a resonant heartbeat of the universe itself. The air, thick with the alien mineral scent, seemed to grow denser, the weight of the cosmos pressing down on him, forcing him to confront the implications of what he had just witnessed, what he had just become. This was the Virada 5, the ultimate devastating conclusion that closed one cycle of understanding and ripped open an abyss of unimaginable possibilities. The truth wasn't a discovery. It was an impact, a seismic shift in his entire existence. The Anunnaki weren't just ancient gods or extraterrestrial visitors. They were cosmic gardeners, genetic engineers, architects of human civilization, returning to tend to their creation. Nibiru was not merely a planet. It was a mobile, self-sustaining vessel, a generational ark, carrying the remnants of their civilization, a vessel that made its pilgrimage through the solar system on a cyclical basis, its return heralded by the signs and symbols he had meticulously uncovered. The structure beneath the desert floor wasn't a ruin. It was a dormant gateway, a long-sleeping beacon, now reactivated by his touch, by the very energies he had inadvertently channeled through the locket. It was a communication hub, a landing platform, a place where the sky dwellers had once descended and would descend again. The declassified truth wasn't just about their past presence. It was about their imminent return. Humanity wasn't a random evolutionary accident. It was a carefully cultivated species, engineered for a specific purpose that was only now beginning to unfold as their creators prepared for their next arrival. Was it for harvesting resources again? For oversight? For a new phase of genetic manipulation? The images Aris had absorbed hinted at all of these, a complex, millennia-spanning project reaching its next critical juncture. Aris stared at the Anunnaki projection, its luminous eyes holding a silent, profound challenge. The truth, stripped bare, was terrifying in its scope. Humanity was a part of a larger cosmic tapestry, woven by hands far more ancient and powerful than any human could conceive. Our history, our myths, our very DNA were all imbued with the legacy of these beings. And now the cycle was turning once more. The return was not a prophecy to be debated by scholars, but an imminent event, written in the stars and etched into the very core of the earth. He was no longer just an academic, he was a living conduit, a receptacle for a truth that would shatter the foundations of every human institution, every belief system. The projection began to subtly dim, its luminous form wavering, as if its energy was slowly being drawn back into the earth. The hum, while still present, softened, receding into a lower, more resonant frequency. The basalt columns seemed to absorb the fading light, returning to their dark, imposing stillness. The desert night, though still charged, began to reclaim its silent, indifferent majesty. Aris felt a profound sense of exhaustion, as if every ounce of his energy, every shred of his conscious thought, had been consumed by the revelation. He stood there, alone in the vast, silent expanse, the cold, desert wind whipping around him, carrying with it the echoes of ancient whispers and the promise of an unimaginable future. The ultimate revelation was not a simple answer, but an overwhelming impact. It was the understanding that humanity's story was not its own, that our evolution, our development, even our self-perception had been intricately guided, manipulated, and observed by these celestial architects. Their return wasn't an invasion, it was a homecoming. But what kind of homecoming? Were they returning as benevolent guardians, eager to reclaim their creation and guide it to new heights? Or were they returning as absentee landlords, checking on their property, perhaps to exploit it further, or even to reset it? The vastness of the desert seemed to absorb these questions, offering no immediate answers, only a profound, echoing silence. The faint light of dawn, A faint purple bruise on the eastern horizon began to push back against the darkness, slowly revealing the familiar contours of the Superstition Mountains. Aris stood rooted to the spot, the locket now cool and inert in his hand, its blue light extinguished. The Anunnaki projection had fully receded, the circular schematic on the ground fading back into fine black dust. The hum had vanished, leaving only the profound, resonant silence of the desert. Yet everything had changed. The world he had known, the universe he had inhabited, was irrevocably altered. He was no longer just Aris Thorn, the rogue scholar. He was a vessel of forbidden knowledge, a living testament to a truth humanity was not yet ready to comprehend. He looked up at the fading stars, now paling in the encroaching light, and for the first time he saw them not as distant points of light, but as pathways, as highways for beings of immense power and ancient purpose. He saw the cosmic ballet of Nibiru, its cyclical return, an inevitability, not a myth. He felt the genetic echo of the Anunnaki within his own cells, a silent testament to his origin, to humanity's manufactured genesis. The truth was not a theory to be debated, but a living, breathing reality, poised on the brink of re-manifestation. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping across the vast, indifferent desert, a landscape that had held this secret for millennia, guarding it with its silence and its solitude. The wind picked up, a cold, dry whisper that seemed to carry the ancient voices of the past, mingling with the whispers of an impending future. He knew, with a certainty that transcended fear, that his journey had just begun. This wasn't an end, it was a threshold. He was merely one man, an insignificant speck in the grand cosmic scheme, yet he carried a truth that could either liberate humanity or plunge it into eternal chaos. The choice, if there was one, was not yet clear. The narrator never fully answers. He leaves the last phrase as a searing mark on the audience's mind, something that echoes and invites profound reflection. The desert stretches, endless and indifferent, holding secrets far older than humanity, secrets now stirring awake. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has deeply resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and share it with someone who needs to see this. Aris found himself staring at the horizon, where the first thin sliver of the sun was just beginning to break, painting the sky in soft pastels of rose and gold. The harsh reality of the desert was slowly reclaiming its dominance, washing away the ethereal blue glow and the holographic visions. The ground, where the Anunnaki projection had stood, was now just a smooth, obsidian-like surface, a faint, circular impression, the only remaining evidence of the night's impossible revelations. The vastness of the sky above, now a lighter shade of deep blue, felt less like a protective dome and more like an infinite open doorway, inviting yet terrifying. The secrets he had unwillingly inherited now weighed on him, a heavy cloak woven from cosmic threads and ancient deceit. He began the long walk back to his truck, each step echoing the emptiness that now filled him, yet also an odd sense of profound purpose. His mind, still reeling from the download of information, felt both expanded and impossibly heavy. He understood now that his entire life, his obsession, his mentor's disappearance, had all been meticulously orchestrated, a complex dance of destiny and preordained discovery. He was a piece in a puzzle, activated when the time was right, a key turning in an ancient lock. The sun climbed higher, casting the desert in a stark, unforgiving light, revealing every jagged rock, every dried-up creosote bush, every ripple in the sand. But to Aris, the landscape now held a deeper, almost sacred meaning, a canvas inscribed with the history of gods and men. The air remained still, almost reverent, as if the desert itself was holding its breath, awaiting the next stage of the cosmic drama. He reached his truck, the worn metal of its door cool against his hand. He He glanced back at the site, now appearing as nothing more than a cluster of unusual rock formations under the harsh glare of the morning sun. No hum, no light, no spectral figures. Only the vast, silent expanse of the Nevada desert, guarding its secrets once more. But Aris knew. He carried the truth within him, a burning ember of knowledge that could never be extinguished. It wasn't about convincing others anymore. It was about understanding his own role in the unfolding narrative. The journey ahead was unknown, perilous, but inevitable. Driving away from the site, the rising sun now directly in his rearview mirror, Aris felt a strange mix of exhilaration and profound sorrow. Exhilaration for finally having seen the truth, for having his life's work validated in the most impossible way. Sorrow for the innocence lost, for the comfortable illusions shattered, for the immense burden of knowledge he now carried alone. The world he was driving back into, the world of highways, gas stations, and mundane human concerns, seemed fragile, almost absurd, in the face of what he had witnessed. How could he ever explain this? How could he articulate a truth that defied human language, that rewrote history itself? He passed a faded billboard advertising a roadside diner, its cheerful depiction of pancakes and coffee feeling jarringly out of place. He realized he was hungry, intensely so, but the thought of ordinary food, ordinary human interaction, felt foreign, almost repulsive. His senses were still attuned to the echoes of ancient voices, the hum of alien technology, the profound silence of cosmic creation. He felt disconnected, observing the world as if through a thick pane of glass, an alien in his own home. The desert stretching around him felt like a vast, knowing entity, its silence no longer indifferent, but conspiratorial, a shared secret between himself and the ancient land. The locket, now tucked into his shirt pocket, felt like a burning coal against his skin, a constant reminder of the quantum leap his understanding had taken. He wondered about his mentor, Dr. Finch. Had Finch known the full scope of it? Had he chosen to disappear, or had he been taken, silenced to protect the secret, or perhaps to guide Aris without direct interference? The implications of a clandestine society linked to these ancient beings, subtly manipulating events, guiding humanity towards a preordained destiny, were staggering. The layers of deception, the interwoven narrative of control, extended far beyond the simple academic suppression he had once believed. He was now a participant in a game played on a cosmic chessboard, with humanity as the pawns. The drive back to his home in Arizona was long and arduous, each mile a mental battle to integrate the impossible into his reality. The desert seemed to stretch indefinitely, a vast, indifferent witness to his profound transformation. The sun, now high in the sky, beat down relentlessly, mirroring the intensity of the thoughts swirling in his mind. He pulled over at a desolate overlook, the truck's engine ticking as it cooled. He stepped out, feeling the grit of the sand beneath his worn boots, the vastness of the sky above. He pulled the locket from his pocket, its surface now cool and inert, reflecting the harsh sunlight like a dull shard of obsidian. It was a tangible link, a physical key to a truth that now resided solely within him. He looked out at the endless expanse of the American Southwest, the Superstition Mountains, a distant, hazy silhouette on the horizon. This land, so steeped in its own human history, its indigenous legends, was also a silent witness to a much older, much grander narrative. The stories of sky people found in countless Native American traditions now resonated with a terrifying, undeniable truth. They weren't just myths. They were fragmented memories, passed down through generations, echoes of the Anunnaki's presence, their technological prowess, their genetic interventions. Humanity had been told the truth in stories and symbols, but had consistently dismissed it as fable. The ultimate revelation wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, but a slow, insidious awakening of forgotten knowledge. It was the understanding that the Anunnaki weren't just a part of humanity's past. They were inextricably linked to its future. Their cycles of return were not random occurrences, but programmed events, a cosmic clock ticking down to the next phase of their interaction with Earth and its inhabitants. What that phase would entail remained a chilling enigma. Was it a renewal, a new age of technological advancement and spiritual awakening? Or was it a reclamation, a reassertion of control over their creation, perhaps even a reset? The desert offered no easy answers, only the vast, echoing silence that had always been its most profound secret. If this content has opened your mind, comment below, "I saw what he saw." This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell, because the next episodes will go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the continuation of this journey. Aris knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the story was far from over. He was now a keeper of the deepest truth, an accidental prophet in a world oblivious to its cosmic origins and its preordained destiny. The desert wind, picking up speed, seemed to whisper through the ancient canyons, carrying the echoes of forgotten gods and the silent promise of their return. He was no longer just a man driven by intellectual curiosity. He was a silent witness, a recipient of a revelation that had fractured his reality and remade it into something far more vast, terrifying, and profoundly significant. The sun beat down, turning the desert into a shimmering mirage, blurring the lines between what was real and what was merely perceived. He drove on, leaving the sight behind, but carrying its monumental truth within him, a truth that would forever echo in his mind, a perpetual challenge to the very fabric of human understanding. The true declassified files were not in any government archive. They were now etched into his very soul.